and your first time joining us, I really like to just take a second. It's an honor for me to introduce Chelsea Burnett, Dr. Reshma Goravajala, and Dr. Omid Fatui. So Chelsea Barnett is the Director of Learning Experience at WGU Academy. Prior to joining Academy, she spent more than a decade at WGU using data and focused course designed to better the lives of students. Chelsea championed the use of social emotional learning resources and research across the university and is our resident expert in the field of experiential learning and research design. Dr. Reshma Goravajala is a research scientist at WGU Academy, where she designs, implements, and evaluates interventions to better understand student learning. Her area of expertise is on identifying and mitigating individual differences in memory and complex learning in and out of the classroom, using both quantitative and qualitative research methodology. Her research has helped to identify scalable strategies for individuals across lifespans to improve their learning outcomes on typical educational measures and routine life tasks. And last but definitely not least is our dear colleague, Dr. Omid Fatui, who serves as a research associate at the Learning Research Development Center based at the University of Pittsburgh and as the Director of Learning and Innovation at WGU Labs. Omid helped co-found the College Transition Collaborative at Stanford University. He spends most of his time translating actionable research insights into practice through intervention design and evaluation, presentations, and training tailored to specific groups. Without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to my colleagues for understanding performance states, stress, threat, and rest. Reshma, please.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you all for being with us today. For those of you who were able to attend the webinar a few weeks ago, thank you for all of the ways in which you made that a very productive and fruitful experience. You're on deck to do that again this time around. And whether this is your first or second webinar with us, we hope that you will share your thoughts and questions with us throughout the next hour. Let's take a moment now to locate the Q&A button in the chat. So they're both located in the bottom right of your screen. There will be specific times in today's webinar where we'll share some of our stories and ask for any that you have in return. But if there's anything you'd like to share, especially any clarification questions you might have in between those moments, please do so. We'll keep an eye on the chat as we're having our own conversation and going through the slide deck with you. So all of you saying good morning back, and thank you. So let's see, moving now to, actually, Anna, can you make me the presenter? Thank you also for bearing with us through technical issues.
Yes, 1 second.
Thank you.
You should be the presenter now.
Thank you, Erin. Perfect. So because we have a mix of individuals who were with us last time and some new folks, the first thing I'm going to do is just briefly recap what we covered last time. We highlighted the importance of non-cognitive skills, which often don't get talked about, especially in the higher education realm. The three of us, along with the folks that we're lucky enough to work with, truly believe that having non-cognitive skills can lead to improvement in the classroom, in the workplace, and in relationships that we have with ourselves and with each other. If we focus on helping a learner connect what they're learning to their values, to their motivations, help them build empathy, develop what is called a growth or thriving mindset, if we can help them raise awareness of thought and behavior patterns that might be holding them back, provide them the support of coaches or other individuals who believe in them and their abilities 100%, and if we can create an environment in which they, no matter their age, their SES, their racial identity, or whether or not their parents graduated from college, if we can make everybody feel and know that they belong and that they too can be a successful learner, that's when we believe that people can thrive. When students have this foundation of knowledge and can adopt this sort of thriving mindset or adaptive mindset, that's when we can believe that they'll be the most resilient, individuals, can leap over hurdles and bounce back from setbacks, can create smarter goals and manage their time and master the content of whatever it is they're learning. In today's webinar, we're going to keep digging further and focus on times when that learning is not optimal. So the framework that we'll be using for today's webinar, first of all, shout out to Omid, who's done a lot of thinking on these particular categorizations and who spent a lot of time in the last few weeks making sure that we're all on the same page and aware of what we're trying to talk to you about today. So in terms of these three different categories, the first is stress, and today we'll be focusing a lot more on the physiological aspects of the stress. Then we'll move on to psychological threat and really defining that and making sure that we all have an understanding and grounding us using student stories and experiences from our own lives that you might be able to relate to. And then the last is an area of rest, which can sound deceptive, and Omid will talk about what really that means. And with all of these, we don't want to leave you with, okay, so these are areas and these are factors that can lead to underperformance. Great, have a good day. That's not our goal. Our goal is to bring awareness and then also bring awareness to strategies that we can use to improve our learning and to achieve a more optimal learning. So to start out, we're going to start with that stress. This is a term that all of us have used. Maybe a lot of us have used on this fine Monday already. And it's a term that actually has a scientific definition. And to really get at what we consider a stress response, I'm going to perhaps induce one in some of us. So to start here, let's see, this is supposed to be a video. So Aaron, can you try help me out with why, how can I get the video to play?
Yes. So do you want to just share your screen and share the video?
Yeah, let me do that really quick. Make sure I sit through any ads that there are so we don't all have to sit through them together. Can you all see the YouTube video?
Yes.
Thank you. What I'm going to do now is thank you also for those in the comment. So just to set us up before I start playing this video, we're going to watch a video recorded by an individual named Kyle. Kyle was going on a hike in Utah, which is actually where a few of us are located right now. And he thought he saw some cubs of like bobcat cubs. Pulled out his phone, wanted to take some pictures. And what followed was 6 minutes that Kyle called the scariest 6 minutes of his life. As we watch the following 12 seconds, I want to have all of you think about your bodily reactions as you watch this video. Think about what experiences you're having, what thoughts are coming to mind, and then think about what if you were in Kyle's shoes? What if you were going for a hike on a beautiful day and you came across what we're about to watch? On the next, in a few minutes, I'm going to ask you all to type in the chat and share with all of us what physiological or body reactions come to mind when you think of this really physically threatening situation. I'm going to play this video a couple of times for dramatic effect. It's 12 seconds. Many that missed it the first time around. So you can see there is a mom cougar who actually followed, who stopped for a little over a minute, and at various points she charged and she charged towards him, and he obviously experienced a stress response. So taking a couple of seconds now, I would love to have some audience input on what body reactions you had either as you watched this video or what you imagine you would have had if you too were faced with this really threatening situation. We're getting some really great responses. Someone pulling out trachycardia. All right. Good job, Susan. I might have to look that up. Paralyzed to do something, sweaty palms. Don't want to die as food. Me neither, Darren. Sounds very miserable. Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of different responses. And one of the purposes of this activity is to highlight that a stress response manifests itself very differently in different individuals. But there are some ways that a lot of us have this shared experience. I would hope that not a lot of us in this room have been faced with a mom cougar on a hike, but all of you were able to either empathize with what Kyle might have been going through in that moment, or you yourself watching this 12-second video were able to think about what you yourself are feeling. And so some common themes that are coming out here: heart rate spiking, sweaty palms, just abject terror. Some people are talking about having a flight response, whereas other individuals are talking about maybe picking up a really big stick. What Kyle does, right, is you might have heard in the start of the video, he says, he's kind of roaring back at the cougar. He's trying to make himself seem bigger. Lots of people in the chat, again, just talking about fear, sweating, stomach dropping, running. And so these are all really, really excellent responses, and they highlight what are common bodily reactions to stress responses. And so let me now thank you again for your input here. So this is something that we actually at WGU Academy walk through with our students. And as we continue this presentation, you'll see why it's relevant for students. But this is something that we highlight in our program for academic and career advancement. If you joined us in the previous webinar, you've heard us talk about this course, which we often abbreviate to PACA. And one of the goals that we have in PACA is to raise awareness of somebody's tendencies when they are faced with, when they perceive a threat, when they go into what we term a bioresponse. So a bioresponse is a series of physiological responses in your brain and your body that happen when you get triggered with something that you perceive to be threatening or stressful. And so I like to think about it like dominoes. Something happens and the first domino falls and it's just a cascade. And so a lot of this happens automatically. Your brain, parts of your brain that we'll get into next, work on autopilot. And really everything happens super, super quickly, and you might not even realize that this is happening, right? So if you're faced with a cougar on a hike, you're not thinking like, oh yes, there are my sweaty palms now. Oh, okay, there's the hair rising on the back of my neck. It's just happening, just like that. It's that domino cascade that happens. So how does this get triggered? What exactly happens in our brains? A lot of you used the language that you see all the way on the right, which is the output. So fight or flight. This is something that we've said colloquially and just lay language often. But what really happens in the brain is that, so firstly, the brain contains regions and structures that all interact with each other to create responses. When you perceive a threat, so on the left you can see, the cougar coming here and scaring somebody, you have a tiny part of your brain. It's conceptualized here as a little kidney bean. It's called the amygdala. And the amygdala is part of one of the earliest formed regions of the brain. And the amygdala sort of hijacks everything. It takes over. Typically, how you'd want to respond to any situation is by using another part of your brain called the frontal lobe. So the frontal lobe is responsible for higher functions like rational thinking, reacting with empathy or insight, using emotional intelligence, using all of these rational parts, thoughts to make decisions. When a threat is perceived and the amygdala takes over, what you get are these automatic responses that make it much harder for you to respond in a rational, higher order way. And so, what happens when the amygdala is activated is a series of hormones get released. So, one is cortisol and the other is adrenaline. You can think of these as just pumping, honestly, a lot of just energy into your brain and directing resources away from the rational thinking lobe of the frontal lobe to other parts of your brain that can help you survive whatever this threat happened. And so in some situations, people have a fight response, meaning that they get ready to pick up that big stick. They get ready to charge, or they get ready to have a physical encounter. In some cases, you can have a flight response, meaning that, as some people in the chat said, just run. You're trying to maintain distance between you and whatever threat you're perceiving for your safety, for your survival. In some cases, the response is to freeze. You become paralyzed. All of these things happen. You can feel your heart rate spiking. You can feel your palms getting sweaty. You might have a stomach ache. You might feel like your muscles are tensing up, and you feel paralyzed and you freeze up. Another option is that in some cases where you perceive a threat, you might have an appease response. This one isn't talked about a lot, but this one is essentially where you automatically start trying to de-escalate the conversation. You try calm the individual or the situation that is threatening to you, but you do so in a way that it becomes sort of a habit. It can be self-sacrificial. You're automatically trying to say, okay, I agree, it's fine, everything's fine. And so all of these bioresponses, again, happen automatically, and people have tendencies or favor certain ones in certain situations. And so this is not to say that if you were to see a cougar, every single one of us would pick up a stick and fight. Even in the chat, as you can see, and as you think about your own responses, there is a variety in how we all respond to these threats, but these are automatic, that domino falling responses that we can have when we have a really stressful encounter and we perceive a threat. At this point, you're probably wondering, how is this relevant? We're all sitting, in an educational setting. Where else does this show up? So I'm going to throw it over now to my colleague Chelsea for her to talk a little bit more about how else this shows up in our lives.
Thanks, Reshma. One of the things that is important to know is that aside from the physical sort of consequences or things that happen within your body that are part of these responses, is that there are other processes or consequences that happen as a result of that as well that have effects if you think about the application of learning too. So as you're going through this biological response, you start to focus in on exactly what the stimuli is, right? Your brain's or your amygdala's whole purpose is to keep you alive in this very moment. So as a result of that, it's going to narrow in on the threat, right? It's going to help you fade out everything else that's going on around you. As a part of that, your ability to express empathy and compassion are going to be reduced. It's going to sort of shut down some other non-necessary components of your body, such as your immune response, your digestive functions. Processing extraneous information that's not relevant to that specific threat are also going to be reduced. And you're really going to focus in on that threat, which if you think about it, is focusing on the negative, right? So if you think about those things and then apply it to the context of learning that we're talking about today, what is the consequence of that? The consequence is that really learning is not happening. If we're filtering out all of the extraneous information, if our creativity and innovation are sacrificed, our ability to empathize or express compassion are reduced, All of these things we would consider critical in our learning environments and in our classrooms to really engage in meaningful conversation, in collaboration, and in deep learning. So in other words, when we are functioning in stress response or in threat response, we're not likely functioning in learning, right? So what we've talked about as we've started this conversation is really an example of how our amygdala responds when we're in physical danger. And these are often the easiest ones to think of, frankly, when we talk about fight or flight response. There are even other ones, though most of us have not been stalked by a cougar, I hope. I'm sure that many of us can relate to being cut off in traffic, right? Going 80 miles an hour, or depending upon where you live, down the freeway, somebody cuts you off, you have to slam on your brakes, you very narrowly miss a high-speed accident. Thankfully, your reaction time is good. You know, you've missed that accident and you've reacted in time, but your body is now being bathed in those hormones that Reshma talked about, that cortisol, that adrenaline. Your blood has rushed to all of your extremities, right, away from the core of your body. You may feel your heart pounding, your palms are sweaty, they may be getting cold. You go back to that slide we just talked about, your empathy is reduced, your compassion is reduced, you're probably feeling emotions of anger. You're likely focused on the negative aspects of that situation. You're not noticing what's around you or other people. Everything is focused on what just happened right in front of you. And all of that has occurred within milliseconds of that event happening, really without much, if at all, cognitive thought coming from you, much rational thought. And if you think about that, what's the result of that in many cases? If that response continues, because oftentimes these bioresponses, though they're instantaneous, if they're not recognized, can continue on inside of our bodies for hours at a time, some research suggests. This is where road rage comes into play, right? We continue on in that response willfully at times, into other reactions, into other choices. And that continuation of itself long after the actual event has concluded. What's challenging about these situations is that the amygdala itself, it's like a honing beacon. It's constantly searching your environment for these threats, but it's really not good at determining the difference between a physical threat and some other type of threat. It gets it wrong, frankly, a lot of the time. And that's good for us in the sense that we need to stay alive. We want to stay alive, right? But it's also bad if we are not good at recognizing when it's getting it wrong. It really can't tell the difference between that cougar charging down the trail, someone cutting you off in traffic, an embarrassing post about you on social media, having your work criticized publicly in front of your team, or that math test that you just failed again. All of those things can result in the exact same types of physical reactions, those flood of hormones in your body that then cause the irrational emotional reactions that we have externally. And so what we're talking about today is how to really become aware of those things and how those states then show up as underperformance when we are not aware of them. So I want you to think about a time when you have experienced some type of non-physical threat that we're talking about, so a psychological threat of type. This could be you received a negative performance review at work that you really feel like is unfair. It could be that car that swerves in your lane that very nearly causes an accident. You could have gotten a phone call that a loved one of yours is in the emergency room. It might be that you're getting pulled over while driving. It might be that you're hearing someone being called a racial slur. It might be that a colleague takes credit for your work in a high stakes project. All of these things across different domains could induce a state of threat for you. As you think about these or any others that you might have experienced, I want you to think about what you're hearing in this example that's in your mind. What are you seeing? What's going on in your environment around you? What are you feeling in your body as you think about this example? And when we walk through this with students, what they'll often notice is that looking at this video of the cougar and then thinking about this time when I am dealing with a difficult math exam and I'm dealing with these thoughts and emotions that I have about this grade that I got, I am experiencing those same physical sensations. I'm feeling the tension in my muscles. I'm feeling my rapid heartbeat. I'm feeling the cold, sweaty palms because it is the same reaction that I'm having within my body, right? And most of the time, students are not able to naturally put those two things together and understand that it is actually a threat response that's occurring for them. And we could spend an entire webinar talking about what those threat responses look like in our personal relationships or in the workplace. But for the purposes of our webinar today, we're really going to talk about what they look like in our learning environments and how they contribute to that underperformance. So we've been talking about that in terms of the title psychological threat. And that there are many different types or ways that psychological threat show up. And these are invisible in a lot of ways. They're not tangible like a physical threat can be, but they're just as numerous, if you will, as those physical threats. And they are just as powerful, if not more powerful in some cases, in triggering that automatic fight or flight response. So you can think about threats to your social status, to any type of perceived power, to your financial security, to your emotional well-being, to the feeling of being worthy of love or belonging, to any kind of perceived lack of fairness or lack of trust, right? What do these look like for students in a classroom? Can a bad grade on a paper be the difference for a student in keeping or losing a scholarship? If their value of themselves is being defined by their grades, does feedback, whether constructive or not, tell them that they are worthless, right? Because they didn't get what they perceived as a good grade, that it's taking away from the worth or value that they believe that they need. If no one looks like them, do they believe that they belong? Right? If they raise their hand and answer a question in a way that is wrong, does that mean that they're stupid or that they don't belong? Do the grades that they get or the scores that they receive reinforce the beliefs that they have about themselves, that they don't really belong here in the first place and they can't really do this and that they're not meant to be here? All of these things can contribute to those same types of reactions in students that cause them to disengage, that cause them to fight back in what we might perceive as irrational reactions or over-the-top reactions within our classrooms that we're not expecting, or disengage from our curriculum entirely. So why does it matter that we become aware of this or that they become aware of this? Really, we're living in a time right now of dramatically increased economic uncertainty, health anxiety, racial unrest. Our world today primes our students for a constant state of stress. And what that means is that many more of our students are coming into our classrooms in a heightened state of stress, which means that they're primed for more of these threat or stress responses. And what does that mean for their learning? What does that mean for their experiences, their sense of belonging, their identity? It means that without awareness of these processes and of these experiences, they have less choice because they're more susceptible to this automatic fear-based processing. A lot of what we teach to students is that as you become aware of these automatic processes within your body, you develop choice. It's not that you are going to be able to change your biology. It's not that you're going to take this amygdala out of your brain, because you do in fact need it. It does serve a very important purpose in keeping you alive. You do want it to function in the way that it does. But as you become aware of this heightened state auto response, and you develop this awareness and choice, you can choose how to respond. When you sense that heart rate going up, when you feel those sweaty palms, you can ask yourself what's going on and what's really occurring in this situation, and how do you want to move forward? Because without that, then our students are going to continue to disengage. They are going to continue to have difficulty engaging with the curriculum in meaningful ways, and creating beautiful courses with the latest learning science and design is not in fact going to overcome those hurdles and that biology. What we want to do is help students become more intentional and help them identify both these physiological and psychological responses that are causing them these setbacks in their learning that are mental and performance based, and help them with more adaptive and productive strategies. So how do we do that? We've talked about greater awareness, and really we teach that through mindfulness. We think of mindfulness really as the foundation to all of this. We have daily opportunities to recognize where these experiences and threat or stress responses are happening, and then choose how we want to respond. In reality, every single one of us on this call probably has daily experiences with this. It's not that you are necessarily going to have less of them. It is that you're going to have increased awareness of when they are happening. Once students have an increased awareness of when they're happening, then we can transition to teaching other strategies to them. Things like attributional reframing, right? Especially when it comes to fixed mindset or self-efficacy, or when we talked about worthiness, right? Helping them reframe those thoughts and talking about that and asking for support about that, normalizing and encouraging that positive help-seeking behavior to support them, are going to be great strategies that we can help build around them once they have an awareness of why they need that. If you address the foundational needs of awareness, then you can build the skills. If you build the skills first, they won't be able to apply them in the right moments of time without the awareness. And kind of think about it sort of in Maslow's hierarchy of needs framework, that the awareness and the mindfulness piece has to sort of fill the foundation or the base of the hierarchy of needs, and then you can start to layer the skills on top of that. So all of that to say, what do students think of this, right? We like to put in a couple of student quotes just to sort of make it real for you around what this experience is like for students. In particular, I think the last one that's bolded here is my favorite, because when we talk about fear-based processing or automatic processing or threat responses, students often come out of this with this realization that in some cases, when you have an automatic response, that is my body protecting me. But in many cases, when I continue with that response, that is something that I'm doing to myself. And once I become aware of that, that's where I have the opportunity to really take on agency, control that, change that. And that makes them feel powerful. That makes them feel in control, which is exactly what we want for our students. We want them to be in that position of agency and really take control of their learning journey. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Omid to talk about rest states.
Thank you, Chelsea. I'm just gonna make sure I can do this. Great. Thank you, Chelsea and Reshma, for putting so much work so succinctly with such beautiful words. I even myself, having heard this together, makes me realize just exactly what's happening with both the stress and the threat states. That ultimately, when students are navigating their academic journeys, they're confronted with these moments of ambiguity where they are tasked with trying to make sense of what does this mean when my adrenaline is pumping? What does this mean when I have doubts about whether I belong, whether I can do this, whether I am represented? And the way that they navigate those questions in their minds determines ultimately what we are evolved to do, to engage, fight, or to disengage, flight. And that what the program here largely does is it first raises awareness about the causes of those emotions, of those thoughts, so that rather than making internal attributions to say, well, I'm feeling stressed or anxious or doubtful because it's a reflection that I'm not cut out to be in college, that I can't do this, and instead have a clear understanding of exactly what those emotions and feelings and thoughts mean in a way that does detach it from any negative self view. So stress and threat are both moments that test people and gets them to question, what does this mean? And finding strategies and training that helps them make more adaptive attributions, to understand that the anxiety that I have is a normal part of the transition. It's a normal part of starting something new. It's a normal part of challenging myself, and not a reflection that I'm not smart enough, that I don't belong, and I shouldn't be here. So incredibly important. Thank you for that overview. What I want to do now is pivot slightly and talk about a different state, a state that actually I get approached about a lot from students themselves, and that we know as one of those three foundational categories of underperformance. And that has not to do with moments of high stakes or high stress, where the pressure's on, the lights are on you, you've got a big test to do, you've got a touchdown to make, um, or moments where you're really sort of trying to navigate your way out of these moments of self-doubt and self-criticism and threat, but rather moments that occur in between. The large contingency or component of your time that is spent trying to stay engaged, stay motivated, stay focused, but not having any direct external force that's pulling you or pushing you in either direction. So a lot of students that come to me say, I have a really hard time staying focused when I'm supposed to be studying at home, or I have a really hard time staying motivated to complete my degree. These are broadly what we would probably categorize as rest states, essentially. And Reshma said there's probably a better term for it, but recognizing that there are these large moments where people have to find the motivation, find the self-regulation, find the focus to do the work that's needed for mastery. So the question is, how does that happen? Well, before we get into some descriptions, I wonder if and you all can talk about or think about moments when you have had an experience of knowing that you need to commit to a goal or stay focused or delay gratification, but found yourselves having a hard time doing that. Maybe in a few words, describe what that was like, what you felt internally, if there was a solution that got you out of it, what that looked like. And it can be in any domain. It can be in academics, it can be in health, it can be in relationships. Any moment when you knew what to do, but found it difficult because there was no clear force driving you to do it. And it could be something as simple as getting out of bed. But if you have any examples that come to mind, what that feels like for you when you're navigating that moment, when you know you should be doing something and yet can't find that motivational juice to do it, and then if strategies come to mind as you're navigating those. I know again, classically the realm of sports and health is one that we can all think of. Waking up in the morning, knowing you've got to put on your shoes, get out and go into the cold and do the run that you know you need to do, and yet you don't feel like doing it. A lot of the times I get students telling me, I have to take this math class, but it's not part of my major. Just don't want to do it. It doesn't seem interesting to me. I don't feel passionate about it. This concept of passion is actually pretty common. Or others saying, I sit down for 3 hours and I know I should be studying, but at the end of the 3 hours, I look at my paper and I've got very little done. Oh, and by the way, my phone is right next to my paper. So what is happening there? And I want to again just take one broad step back and circle around exactly why this is part of this conversation today, which is that without an awareness of what these forces are, where they come from, and what they mean, I think we're all sort of left to be pulled by their momentum, kind of be pulled in any direction that they take us without us having an intentionality about how do we choose to engage or interact with this force. But when you become aware and attuned to the signs and the triggers of when these various states can come online, then choice becomes a possibility. You can say, I know that I'm distracted because I'm putting myself in a context of distraction. I know that I'm feeling anxious, not because I'm inadequate, but because this is a high stakes test. I'm seeing some really wonderful examples coming through, very thoughtful, that do span the entire range of domains, whether it be managing stress, whether it be just knowing that you need to do something, but finding it frustrating not to have that motivation. And the intent is not to call out any one particular one, but just to get you to reflect on what does that feel like and how common is that? I would also argue that this is probably one of the most common challenges that we have to manage in terms of its representation of time, right? That the high stakes tests and moments of threat, although critically important, are rather acute instances. And instead, the large void in between are moments when we have to find that focus and stay connected. What we're going to do now is share a little bit about why these things unfold, how they play out, and what are the forces and mechanisms underneath the hood that impact this rest state. And indeed, we know that when it comes to motivation, that it is a force that we have come to rely on its existence. And when it's not there, we wonder, why is it not there? I think some of the classic studies, in fact, that showed some long-term consequences and impact of individuals who either have the ability to stay focused and delay gratification or not, with these long-term, lifelong effects, maybe gave us the impression that there's something internal about individuals who are either stronger or weaker in this ability to stay motivated and stay focused and committed to long-term goals. So the marshmallow study, which many of us have probably heard about and know about, and if you've seen videos on YouTube, you see these poor children who are subjected to this painful experience where a marshmallow is placed on a table in front of them, and then the researchers say, if you want this marshmallow, you can have it now, or if you can wait for 15 minutes, I will come back and give you 2 marshmallows. And what they do is they observe what happens. By and large, about 2/3 of these children in those original studies basically succumb to the temptation, and they gave in and they were not able to delay gratification. They had the 1 marshmallow rather than waiting 15 more minutes and get 2 more. What's also important about that body of research is, at least in the original versions of those studies, they found that about 10 or 12 years later, that they had, whether the students were able to delay gratification or not, had these large consequences on their lives. Essentially, delaying gratification was related to a greater sense of self-efficacy, a greater sense of control, and better outcomes on many core standardized metrics of success, including the SATs. And that those who failed were also just a little bit more, had more difficulty regulating their emotions and their thoughts. So the research has concluded maybe there's something internal, innate. There's a personality trait that determines whether people can or cannot delay gratification or control themselves. But that's a very passivistic approach or view about this experience. Throwing your hands in the air and saying, I either can or can't control myself and stay focused is not a useful view of how this works out. And it turns out it's not the actual truth. When they've gone back to revisit some of that early footage, they've realized that the kids who were able to delay gratification actually employed some pretty ingenious strategies. That they were able to look away from the marshmallow. They were able to play with their clothes. They were able to look at the bookshelf or basically divert their attention. And all of this demonstrated that they were able to use a strategy to circumvent or short circuit what's known as the hot system. And all of this really comes down to understanding what the hot and the cold system are and how they operate in moments of temptation and in moments of regulated behavior. Essentially, as Reshma and Chelsea have said, we have this almost dual model brain, one of which is designed for reaction, response, some sort of action in the immediate moment. And another one, prefrontal cortex driven, that is the more calm, cool, and collective system that helps us make rational choices. Another term for these are the hot and the cold systems. And I like this term because the hot system is essentially the part of your brain that is designed to be responsive to an immediate reward or an immediate threat. It's evolved to say, engage and take advantage of this marshmallow because it's basically calories that you need, or run away from that cougar because that's your life on the line. And that is the core, the hard wiring, if you will, of your mind. And on top of that hard wiring, there's all this software that we've added over generations and generations of years of living in society, where we realize that we no longer have to just merely survive. In fact, these higher order cognitive processes are actually adaptive. So making long-term goals and sticking with it, delaying that indulgent treat is useful. But the cold system is built on top of the hot system, which means that when they are competing, the core hot system will win every single time. It will trump whatever your cold system is trying to get you to do. Now, this is a seemingly subtle but incredibly powerful insight because many people will lean on this notion that willpower, this magical force that will somehow find its way in those moments when we need it the most, will come and rescue you. It will help you to stay focused on the teacher that's way in the class, in the front of the class. It will help you to say no to that cookie that's in the cookie jar as you pass your kitchen on the way to your office or your room to study. That somehow your willpower will come in and take control and allow you to make the more adaptive choice, even in the face of your hot system being activated. Well, there's very little research to show that that is the case when these forces are put in contention with each other. That ultimately the hot system will win and your willpower will fail. And making people aware of this can be powerful because A, it helps you realize not to rely on your willpower or to expect it to come to your rescue. And B, it really shifts the way that we think about the strategies that are useful in dealing with motivation and temptation. And specifically, recognizing that our hot system is supercharged to take control, what are the ways in which we can actually take control of our hot system and cold system to make long-term goals possible? Well, there's two broad strategies that actually follow a sequence of effectiveness that consist of situation selection. So if you know that your hot system will play its role, it will trump your cold system, make sure you don't put yourself in an environment where that temptation will be true. So if you have a hard time resisting a drink, don't go to the bar. It's not going to work out well for you. If you have a hard time with indulging in sweets, don't find yourself around some sort of candy store. It's not going to help you. If you're having a hard time staying focused, Maybe sit in the front of the class, not in the back of the class where your attention will be easily diverted and distracted by everything that's in front of you. And these are examples of situation selection, which by and large are one of the most effective ways of regulating your control and motivation. It's not going to magically happen. You're not going to feel like it, but controlling your situation helps to mitigate the pull of the HOT system away from that focused attention. The other thing you can do is, let's say you can't control every environment that you find yourself. There are ways that you can modify that environment to, again, be less distracting. I have lots of colleagues, not lots of colleagues, but I have some colleagues that I connect with on Zoom, and I look at the background and I see that they are in a closet. And I say, what are you doing? They said, well, I have kids in the house. And if I go outside, I know my kids will want to play with me and I will be tempted to play with them. So the best thing I can do is hide out in the closet so that they don't know I'm here. And I know that I have to basically take an effort, take a step to get out, and making that automaticity intentional. Same thing with your telephones. If it's always around you and you have a task at hand, how much are you letting that distraction seep into your focus? So there's a lot of situational modification strategies that you can employ. But again, all of this is centered around first raising awareness that we have this hot and cold system, putting things in perspective in terms of relative weight so that your willpower actually is not this strong, powerful thing that you can rely on. It's not, it will fail you. And then instead recognizing that you can control the situation as a more effective strategy. One of the other things that's interesting about how you can use this insight to serve you is recognizing that goals have this incredible power of taking long distance rewards and putting them near so that you can have that motivation, that reward as a motivation when you're trying to make the sacrifices and stay focused and stay committed, even though the reward itself, like passing a course or graduating in a certain program, won't happen for a long time. But having clear and active goals allows you to have reminders of that proximal reward in the short term so that you can stay connected and motivated by that long-term reward. Another example of how the system can be hijacked is with growth mindset. And essentially, from a neuroscience perspective, we know that our brains are designed to give you a little surge of dopamine whenever you see a reward. That your brain is designed to find the motivational juice to wake you up when you see that marshmallow in front of you. It's just how we've evolved to survive. But what's interesting about a growth mindset, which is this belief that intelligence and getting smarter and growing is not just an individual trait. It's not just a reflection of your grades, but rather the process in itself. Then you're able to also understand how your growth mindset changes the reward architecture so that dopamine is allocated whenever you see yourself making progress on a particular goal. As you engage in that difficult learning, as you achieve more proximal milestones in your goals, now you're employing your dopamine system to also give you that same motivation that you need towards long-term goals, but only if you have a growth mindset. If you believe and understand that the effort in itself is the reward, rather than the outcome as the sole kind of reward, then you're able to take advantage of your dopamine mechanism as well. And the Academy does, as part of its core training, also fosters a growth mindset. So hopefully we've been able to give you a broad overview of why we think about psychological performance in various states, how overarchingly the meaning and the awareness that we have about these states is relevant and important, but that also understanding which state is relevant to you at which time is appropriate for what strategies you choose to employ. So with that, I'll pass it back off to Anna, and thank you for your time.
Thank you again, Omid, and thank you, Chelsea and Reshma. I do ask if you guys have any questions. We do have about another minute or two. Feel free to put your questions in the chat. I can say we have a very impressive audience today talking about waking up at 4 a.m. to study. I think that is willpower, motivation, goal setting, determination, really just impressive. So we want to thank all of you for joining us for this Adaptive Mindset series. My name is right in front of you. I will also put my email address in this chat. You're going to have a few other links in the chat as well. So the second link in the chat is a survey. We would love your feedback. We received great feedback after our first session, a lot of which we used and incorporated in the second session. So please take a minute to fill out that chat. If you have any other questions, comments, or concerns, even just ideas, feel free to reach out to me directly via the email that I just threw in there. And I just want to invite you all to join us next time. So our next session, this will be our third session. There's only 2 more left. We're halfway through. This is going to be on December 16th. So it is, I believe, Thursday. It's Thursday, December 16th at noon Mountain Time, so the same time. Our next topic will be on the war against distraction, mastering your myopia and the myths of willpower. So a link is included, and one of the links will take you to the main page of our Adaptive Mindset series. You're welcome to invite others to register and join the series, but you'll also find our webinar recordings there. So if you wanted to go back and see the first session, feel free to visit that webpage, and you can see the first session video recording. And if you wanted to reference this one or share with others, you can also do so by visiting that page. Looks like we did not get any further questions. So again, we just want to say thank you one last time. We hope you all have a wonderful week and stay well. We look forward to seeing you on December 16th. Thanks, everyone.